Okay, we'll start with this. Well, apparently, WBA light heavyweight champion Dimitri Bivol is waiting on Marcus Browne, and he's not thinking about our tour better beef. A portion of the article reads, Bivol is waiting for the WBA to make a ruling on his mandatory defense against top-rated contender Marcus Browne. For the next fight, it is unlikely that better beef will be a consideration. We are waiting for a decision on the mandatory challenger, who is Marcus Browne. And there is no news as of yet, said Bivol. Bivol has 16 victories and not a single defeat. As BoxingScene.com reported last week, Browne will collide with former world champion Browne-Pascal next month. Pascal challenged Bivol last fall and lost a 12-round decision in a fight where many expected the Canadian veteran to get stopped in the early rounds. Now, you guys out there listening to this video may or may not be aware of this, but Marcus Browne actually has two avenues of opportunity to fight two world champions for two different world titles. The fight between him and Badou Jack was a WBC eliminator that would see the winner afforded an opportunity to challenge Alexander Gvozdyk, the WBC champion. Just as well, Marcus Browne is also aligned via the WBA for a WBA title shot against Dimitri Bivol, and yet we don't see any movement in either of those directions. We don't see Marcus Browne
fighting those guys,
challenging either of those guys, and who he is fighting is Browne-Pascal.
Why?
Now ask yourself, if a guy that has two world title opportunities against two undefeated champions has any aspirations of becoming a world champion himself, then why would he neglect both of those opportunities and instead be fighting Browne-Pascal? Browne-Pascal, who Dimitri Bivol already beat 2 fights ago. What logic, if any, is being employed by Marcus Browne and his handlers? What's really going on there?
Seriously.
And I'll tell you what's going on. It's more of the same from the PBC. It's another chapter, another episode of the PBC trying to keep as many things in-house as they can, even if it comes at the cost of their fighters, even if it comes at the cost of opportunities for their fighters.
You don't believe me?
Bivol, he's a Matchroom DAZN main events guy, and Gvozdyk, he's over there at Top Rank /ESPN. That's the issue. Those are different guys that are with different promotional banners that fight on different platforms. And we all know that while Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum might have a good working relationship, the same cannot be said of the PBC and everybody else. Thus, you'll see fighters like Marcus Browne have opportunities, and you'll see those opportunities stifled in the name of the banner. In other words, they don't want to have to work with anybody, even if it comes at the cost of a guy like Marcus Browne. Because if you ask me, I think Marcus Browne wants to be a world champion. I think he wants to be in those kinds of fights. I think he wants those kinds of opportunities. Because at the end of the day, if he didn't, then why the fuck would you be competing in this sport? You understand? He didn't beat Badou Jack and get to that point to where he's got 2 world title shots. He didn't get to that point because he doesn't want a world title opportunity. I'm of the opinion, and you know, it's just my opinion.
You can disagree.
If you want to know what I think about it, and you're here so I'll assume that you do, I don't get the impression that it's Marcus Browne trying to circumvent a fight. You understand? At least not right now. It doesn't really read that way. Not on his end. I don't get the impression that he's avoiding fights so much as those fights are being avoided for him. That because the PBC characteristically doesn't want to put one of their better fighters in there with a fighter from another outfit, they'll fuck up an opportunity for him. They'll fuck up an opportunity for him how I suspect they fucked up an opportunity for Ortiz and Adam Kownacki, who I also suspect the PBC deliberately tried to keep away from Anthony Joshua when he was in the market for an opponent. I suspect that that's more or less what's happening to Marcus Browne. That they're fucking up an opportunity for him because it doesn't play into their bottom line. They want to keep everything in-house. So with those things in mind, they don't want to have to send one of their guys over there to, say, ESPN and Top Rank, who's their competitor, by the way. They don't want to have to send him over there and be content for someone else on someone else's card, even if it comes at the cost of his title shot. The same is true when it comes to Dimitri Bivol, the WBA title shot, and the fact that the fight would likely air on DAZN. They don't want to see one of their guys end up on DAZN, so what they'll do is they'll stifle his opportunity to keep him on their side of the street, keep things in-house. Thus, instead of seeing Marcus Browne challenging for a world title, he's got an opportunity at 2 world titles, but instead of seeing him fight for one of those world titles, what do? They'll conjure up a Browne-Pascal. A guy that Dimitri Bivol beat 2 fights ago. A guy who, let's be honest, he's on the ass end of his career, okay?
Good man.
And that is coming at the cost of Marcus Browne. And if you don't believe that there's stifling opportunities for their fighters, consider this. Anthony Crolla, a Matchroom guy, had a title shot at Lomachenko.
Remember?
A top-ranked guy. He had a title shot. Now, there was some back and forth between Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum. There was a bit of a small-scale war between them. But at no point in that small war, those negotiations, at no point did Anthony Crolla's title shot become jeopardized. It was just a question of where the fight would land. But the fact that the fight would happen was never in question. He got his title shot. You look again, and you see what's going on with Luke Campbell. Once again, Matchroom guy against top-ranked guy. Same fucking thing. Luke Campbell's gonna get his shot at Vasyl Lomachenko at the vacant WBC title, what have you. At no point is the fighter's opportunity being stifled for the best interests of the banner, whereas with the PBC, that's not the case. At the PBC, if your title shot doesn't fit into their bottom line, then you might not get it. Because Marcus Browne is sitting there at light heavyweight, and he's a good fighter. If you've seen him, he's a good fighter. But at the end of the day, PBC does not have any belts for him to fight for. So do you think it's a coincidence that none of the world titles are on their side of the street? And coincidentally, he's not fighting for any of the world titles in his next fight. Even though, what's the point in fighting Browne-Pascal when you have 2 title shots? You just have to pick the one you like the most. But instead of doing that, what do they got him doing? They got him fighting Browne-Pascal for no title at all. Even though Browne-Pascal is basically coming off a loss to one of the guys that Browne's got a title shot with. You know that there's a lot of talk right now about a potential Errol Spence versus Canelo Alvarez fight, right? That there's numbers being thrown around, something to the tune of $20 million for Errol Spence if he decides to take that fight. There's talks like that. What's Errol? Errol's a PBC guy. Now ask yourself a question. In spite of Errol having called out Canelo Alvarez, right? And because he's the one that said he wants that fight, that he'd be willing to go up there for that fight.
Talk to Canelo right now. We heard you call out Canelo.
Free smoke, man.
We heard you call out Canelo.
Free smoke, man. Free smoke. Ask her to call Al. Let's get it.
Would you be willing to jump 2 weight classes to fight Canelo Alvarez?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
He said that shit months ago, okay? He said that months ago. But in spite of all this talk that's going around, do you think for a second that the big wigs over there at the PBC would allow Errol Spence, even for $20 million, which is a lot of fucking money? It's a hell of a lot more than he made fighting Mikey Garcia. But do you think that for even $20 million, they would allow their prized stallion at 147 pounds to go up there and take a chance on Canelo? No. If they're fucking up opportunities for Luis Ortiz, if they're fucking up opportunities for Adam Kaunaki, if they're stifling opportunities for Marcus Browne, what the fuck makes you think they'd let Errol Spence go up there to 160 and do the dance with Canelo?
They wouldn't.
Never mind who the fuck you think would win the fight, because I'm pretty sure there are people gullible and stupid enough to think Errol Spence stands a chance, based on what he's done at 147 pounds, which, right now it really ain't much. But I'm pretty sure there's people gullible enough out there to think that he would win that fight. But that's besides the point, because the question is, if he was made an offer by Canelo Alvarez for a fight, do you think the PBC would allow him to take it? I mean, ask yourself that question in all seriousness. If the people over there at the PBC are the same kind of people who I suspect would fuck up a world title opportunity in a multi-million-dollar fight at the mecca of boxing against Anthony Joshua. If these are the same kind of people that would fuck up an opportunity like that for Ortiz, then what the fuck makes you think they'd let Errol go in there and fight Canelo? Seriously. If they're willing to fuck up an opportunity for a 40-year-old undercard fighter who only earns a couple $100,000 at a time doing it, if they're willing to fuck up an opportunity for him, then what the fuck makes you think they'd let Errol go in there and fight Canelo? No matter what they say in the interviews.
It's just talk.
I'm sure that Oscar De La Hoya would be receptive to making a fight between Canelo and Errol Spence. I mean, is that the first time he would have had Canelo Alvarez fighting a fighter from a lower weight class? Fuck no.
They've been doing that.
There's all kinds of fights like that on Canelo's resume, you understand. Kermit Cintrone, Alfonso Gomez, Josecito Lopez, Amir Khan. Errol Spence would be just another guy that came up for a Canelo fight. So that's right up Oscar's alley. I can believe him when he says that he would make a fight like that. But what I don't believe is that the PBC would allow Errol to take a fight like that. He's a part of their long-term plans, their bigger picture. And no matter what's being said in the media, they wouldn't allow him to take that fight. He could sit there saying that he's calling out Canelo and that he'd be willing to move up for a fight like that, but all of that is hyperbole, okay? All of that is just talk. The people at the PBC wouldn't allow him to take that fight any more than they allowed Ortiz to take the Joshua fight, any more than they're making Marcus Browne
fight for a title.
take a fight with either Dimitri Bivol or Alexander Vosdik. The bottom line
Is they block fights.
is that the PBC blocks a lot of fights. And if you haven't caught wind of that yet, if you don't see the evidence that is right before your eyes, if you can't read the writing on the wall, it's because you're a fucking illiterate idiot. At the end of the day, it's a common sense question. That's what most of these things are. They're common sense questions that have common sense answers. If Marcus Browne stands today with 2 world title opportunities for 2 separate world titles, then why the fuck isn't he fighting for any of them? And since he's not, who benefits from that? Because it ain't him. Who benefits from everything staying on the same side of the street? You motherfuckers know the answer. Now, in regards to all this Canelo Alvarez versus Errol Spence talk, very proactive talk coming from Oscar De La Hoya, the Canelo side of the street, do realize something. That there's a lot of talk coming from Canelo Alvarez's side of the street. A lot of talk that mentions names like Sergey Kovalev, Callum Smith, Demetrius Andrade, a potential Triple G rubber match. There's a lot of talk coming out of that side of the street. And with the name of Errol Spence, that brings you to potentially five different opponent options. But if it is in fact Canelo Alvarez's wish to become an undisputed middleweight champion before the year is out, then he's working on the clock. Because Canelo Alvarez stands today as the IBF middleweight champion. We know he's got the WBA and the WBC and the Ring Magazine belts, but no other organization is more stringent than the IBF. And it just so happens that they've got a mandatory challenger in line for whosoever chooses to be the IBF champion. Today, that's Canelo. It just so happens that the IBF have already got a guy for Canelo to fight. The order hasn't come down yet. The order for the fight hasn't come down yet. But they do got a guy. And that guy's name is Sergey Didivianchenko, who just fought Jack Coquet not that long ago in an IBF eliminator, thus securing a position as a mandatory challenger. So ask yourselves a question, kids. We all know how the IBF is. We all know what reputation they got when it comes to their mandatories. They'll strip you. They don't care who you are. Ow! Those things in mind. If it really is Canelo Alvarez's wish to become an undisputed champion in the middleweight division, does he actually have time to waste on an Errol Spence?
Not if he wants to keep that belt.
Do you think the IBF would pardon him going up to 168 and fighting a Callum Smith while simultaneously holding on to his belt? Because I don't. In other words, if it really is Canelo's intention to become an undisputed champion, then he needs to act fast and he needs to act now, because it's only a matter of time before they order that Sergey Didivianchenko fight. And Sergey Didivianchenko, good fighter that he might be, does not strike me as the kind of opponent that Canelo Alvarez wants to spend a camp training for, wants to spend time on, wants to have a fight with. I don't think that a name like that, from a solid contender, but who doesn't really have a big profile, that doesn't strike me as what Canelo and his team might view as an attractive fight. In other words, they wouldn't want to waste no time on a guy like that, but they would have to if they wanted to keep that belt. So that puts them in a situation to where, okay, what can we do to keep this belt? Well, we've got two options. We can either satisfy this mandatory, which we really don't want to have to do because this guy's got no profile. We can do that, or we can have a unification fight, which would thereby trump this mandatory. That's the situation that lies before us, ladies and gentlemen, and lies before the unified middleweight champion, Canelo Alvarez. It's only a matter of time before the IBF orders that fight. That's just a matter of fact. We all know how they operate. And if it really is Canelo Alvarez's intention this year to become a middleweight and undisputed middleweight champion, then he's working on the clock. So you ain't even got time to be wasting with Errol Spence's and Sergey Kovalev's and Callum Smith's. Not if you really intend to become an undisputed middleweight champion. The IBF didn't make no bones about stripping Gennady Golovkin, and they won't make no bones about stripping you if you don't do as they say. So you need to act fast before they say you need to do anything. You negotiate that Andrade fight, at this point in the juncture, then you can circumvent that mandatory by participating in a unification fight. I truly wonder how the cookie is going to crumble in spite of what's being said. That while Canelo says he wants to become an undisputed champion, Oscar De La Hoya is entertaining the possibility of an Errol Spence fight. But the schedule and the way that these sanctioning bodies operate, at least this one, it doesn't allow for all of that to happen right away. So I truly do wonder what's going to happen
With Canelo.
in the coming months. We already know that Errol Spence is slated to face Sean Porter in a unification fight sometime towards the end of the summer. So if a Canelo Alvarez fight were on the table, hypothetically speaking, it would have to be 2 fights from now. But use your heads, kids. 2 fights from now, the IBF might order that mandatory. And you can't decide to fight Errol Spence instead of your mandatory and hold on to that belt. It don't work like that. If a mandatory got ordered and Canelo decided to fight Errol instead of Sergey, well, he'd have to forfeit that IBF title, the same title that he just won. So you really can't have it both ways. The only way you get to circumvent Sergey Derevyanchenko and simultaneously hold on to that belt is if you're fighting in a unification fight. And there's only one unification fight left for Canelo Alvarez in the middleweight division. That's the Andrade fight. If you tried to fight Errol, after an order came down, if you tried to fight Errol, or if you tried to go up there and fight Callum, or if you fought Triple G in a rubber match, it wouldn't work. They'd strip Canelo just as easily as they stripped Triple G. So the pool of options for him to circumvent his mandatory while at the same time holding on to that belt, the pool of options is thin. I wonder what's going to happen.